It's Legends Week here on Post Media's panel. I'm Bruce Garriock with the legendary Roy McGregor and Wayne Scanlon, a former columnist here at the Ottawa-Citizen and who now writes for Sportsnet.ca. By the way, I'm just a legend in my own mind. And speaking of legends, Roy, it's Hall of Fame weekend in Toronto, and the class of 2019 is going in, but not in that class is Daniel Alfredsson as a player. And I'm just wondering if we will ever see the day where Daniel Alfredsson gets in.
Well, if you couldn't crack this class, are you ever going to be able to get in? It's the weakest class that I've ever witnessed. Haley Wickenheiser absolutely deserves to win on any class level, but the others, boy. So Daniel Alfredsson, does he qualify as a player? Absolutely. Will he get in? I don't think so, because I detect that there's such a Toronto animosity toward the Ottawa Senators and the Daniel Alfredsson in particular. It's visceral. That it will last a long, long time. There's no point in arguing about it. There's no point in trying to explain it. It's just something that's there, and it's going to prevent him from being in the Hall of Fame for some time, maybe forever.
You know, those are interesting thoughts, Wayne. What are your thoughts on Alfredsson? You know, you look at him, he was almost a point-a-game. If he wasn't a point-a-game player in his career, he was almost a point-a-game player. He didn't win a Stanley Cup. He played at both ends of the ice. He was a leader. He's widely respected here. I think every year people here, when the Hall of Fame class is decided, hold their breath and hope that perhaps, Alfredsson will get those votes.
Well, and don't forget his international play, Bruce, because it's not the National Hockey League Hall of Fame, it's the Hockey Hall of Fame. This is a guy that not only won a gold medal at the Olympics for Sweden and won World Championships, but was the best player on those teams. That Olympic team that won gold, he was the top performer, the top point getter. So I like baseball's system. I don't like this idea that you can campaign for a Guy Carbonneau and make this impassioned presentation in front of a small group and everybody is won over and therefore he wins. Baseball, it's more, the majority rules and common sense people looking at it. If you get 80% of the vote or whatever they decide, and these are legitimate voters, and then I think Alfredsson would have a shot.
It's an interesting debate, Roy, and the other person I think we need to talk about in Ottawa when you're talking about Hall of Fame weekend is the Hall of Fame career of Brian Murray. And as both a coach and a general manager, and a lot of people feel, and Eugene Melnick has certainly talked about this, he should be in the builders category. Again, I hate to repeat myself, but is that something maybe someday we'd see?
Yes, and he doesn't suffer from the same Toronto animosity that Alfredsson does. Brian coached and managed in other areas, from Washington to Detroit and that. So I think he's well enough remembered and was certainly well enough liked that he should get in for a sense of humor for nothing else.
Nobody was better to deal with, Wayne, than Brian Murray.
Oh, we were really blessed to have him to work with. And it seems you do have to have a champion. And Roger Nielsen had his champion group behind him to push to get him in. And I think it'll be the same with Brian.
One of the best trades that Brian Murray ever made was a trade for Craig Anderson. And there's been a lot of discussion about the Ottawa Senators goaltending this week. As we sit down here this morning, we're not sure who's going to start Wednesday night against the New Jersey Devils, but the expectation is that it will be Anderson. Are you guys watching closely what's happening in that net right now? Wayne, we'll start with you. Anders Nielsen, the NHL Player of the Week, and then he gets pulled on Monday night.
Yeah, and I see that as a one-off. I mean, he can't be perfect every night. I think he's been really impressive. He's got great numbers even going back to last year. So I look at it as a 1 and 1A. And to me right now, Anders Nielsen is this team's starting goaltender. And it's 1A with Craig Anderson. I don't have a big issue with him rotating here and there. I mean, this isn't a playoff caliber team. It's all about being in a good draft position next year. So I don't mind the way DJ Smith has handled it so far.
Do you look at this situation, Roy? Craig Anderson has always been the number one here. And I think people have gotten used to Craig Anderson being the number one here. Has he finally maybe got a challenge at this point of his career for playing time? And is that maybe good for the situation?
It's certainly good for the Senators. I think that definitely has a challenge. I would agree with Wayne that the better goaltender at the moment is Nielsen. I would have thought, and I was quite surprised, that Anderson wasn't moved last year. Yeah. His ticket was pretty high enough to bring in something that could have gone toward the rebuild. If he gets enough playing time and plays well enough, I think they can do it again this year. So I do not expect him by any means to finish out the year.
I think they fully went into this year, Roy, thinking that this would be the year that Anderson passes the torch. And I don't think he's played bad this year, but I think he hasn't maybe been able to steal in games like he has in the past. And maybe Anders Nielsen has done that a little bit more than Craig Anderson so far.
A little bit, but yeah.
Yeah,
This is not a very good team.
bit, yeah.
This is not a very good team. You know, you cannot put this on the goaltenders.
I think they're also waiting for someone to rise up down in the minors, right, Bruce?
Yeah.
They've got a lot of prospects down there. Nobody has really risen to the occasion, and that would allow them to move a Craig Anderson at the deadline and bring one of those guys up.
Well, Hochberg and Gustafsson have both struggled, but a guy who hasn't struggled this season is Jean-Gabriel Pajot. He's just having a terrific year. As we speak today, leads the league in plus minus. He's done an excellent job for this team. Roy, I really think he's embraced his role as an alternate captain on this team.
Well, I'm going to say something that will not be popular, and I would like to state that I'm as big an admirer of Pajot as you could ever find. I just think the way he carries himself, the way he has played, the way he has battled that little guy complex and triumphed has been phenomenal. But if you're a hockey team and your best center is Jean-Gabriel Pajot, you are in big trouble.
But they could sign him, Roy, and have him. He doesn't have to be their best center down the road. He can be slot in as number 3 if they extend him, bring him back as a two-way guy, not as your number 1 center. I don't think that's the long-range plan here.
I would hope not.
Well, and I think part of the issue is, Roy, that, Colin White has been hurt, and he basically played hurt since training camp. And I think what we've seen in certainly the last 2 games with Colin White is he's starting to skate a little better. And they really want Colin White and Logan Brown to emerge as the number 1 and number 2 centers when all is said and done. I guess the question is, and I will probably talk about this ad nauseum, probably till the trade deadline, is if they do sign Pajot, guys, and Wayne, we'll start with you, where does he fit in?
Yeah, I think farther down the road, I think you talked about the 2 guys. I think they'd like Logan Brown to eventually be their number 1 guy. I mean, he's got all the tools. He's just got unbelievable vision, terrific hands. If he could just stop getting hurt, it seems every year he has a wrist injury or some injury. He's out again right now and is on his way back soon. I think him slotting in at number 1. And then Colin White number 2. But who are they going to get in the draft next year? They could have 2 top 10 picks in the draft. There may be a number 1 center that's going to fall out of the tree there. So I think Pajot slots in as a two-way guy, number 3 at tops.
Roy, do you sign Pajot to a 5-year deal, or do you if you can, look, he's going to be a valuable piece of the deadline. If you can trade him, do you trade him?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I think he's a fantastic 3rd, 4th center, and every team in the National Hockey League would want him.
Proven playoff guy.
Yeah, great player.
and you know what? And we'll just speak briefly on this next subject, but it also makes room for the young guys. And at some point, this team is going to have a captain. And myself personally, I think we've seen a lot of captain material in Brady Tkachuk. I just wonder what you guys thought.
I think so. He's again, he has to re-sign, right? They have to get him to a long-term deal like they did with Thomas Chabot. So I think they've got one in the hand in Chabot, a potential captain. I think Tkachuk is more the natural leader. So, but again, is he going to be around long-term? You can't make him captain and have him leave. We've seen too much of that.
To me, there hasn't been much joy around this team in the last 2 years or plus, and he exudes joy. And for that reason alone, his positivity, his happiness, his joy in being in the ice says to me that he sends a signal out that this town, this community really needs to hear and see, and that is it's fun to play.
One of the things that's been, before we wrap up here, one of the things that's been a topic of discussion for the last few days, certainly around the National Hockey League, is Don Cherry's comments Saturday night on Hockey Night in Canada. He was subsequently fired on the weekend. Myself personally, I don't know how they could have possibly put him back on the air, whether he apologized or not. I just wonder what your thoughts are.
Well, Don and I have not gotten along for 30 years or so, I'm just shocked that he lasted so long. And he has his connection to hockey vanished, evaporated at least a decade ago, and it's just been a problem ever since. So The nice thing would have been if he had bowed out when the CPC bowed out. The timing would have been right. This is a terrible and sad way for him to leave the game, because his legacy now is just stained. I don't know whether it's ever going to be redeemable. They talk about Hall of Fame and things like that. This will last for a long time. It's a very unfortunate thing that happened.
You know, as I thought Steve Simmons said it best today, Wayne, when he said that this was going to happen. This was how it was going to end, because maybe, as Roy said, they didn't know when the end would come for Don Cherry, but this was probably the way it was going to be scripted, wasn't it?
I think it's true. And I said to Roy the other day, if he'd gone out a couple of years ago on his own terms, he could have gone out gracefully. People would have said nice things about him, as they do when people retire or they die. Instead, you know, he just seemed destined to go out in a ball of flames. But I have an idea for rehabilitating Don Cherry. He could work with some of the new Canadians coming into Canada that need to learn about our culture and our game. Hockey Canada is desperate to get new Canadians to try out hockey. They've got lots of programs in this community trying to get kids to learn how to skate and to take up hockey. They're giving them skates, giving them equipment. Maybe Don could learn something about the new Canadians and their culture, and he could teach them a little bit about hockey, you know, beyond the fighting.
I love it.
Well, it's an interesting take, and I guess we'll see where it goes. For Postmedia's panel, I'm Bruce Garriock with Roy McGregor and Wayne Scanlon. Thanks for tuning in.